I stood in the parking lot of my apartment building in Denver, staring at the invitation that had arrived that morning. The embossed gold lettering spelled out my sister Victoria's name, alongside someone called James, and the date was set for 3 weeks from now. I turned the envelope over in my hands, searching for something that would explain why this had come via mail instead of a phone call or even a text message. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see my mother's name on the screen. "Anna, did you get the invitation?" Her voice sounded strained, like she was reading from a script she had memorized but did not believe in. "I did. I was just about to call Victoria to congratulate her," I said, walking toward my car. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I heard my father's voice in the background, low and insistent, though I could not make out the words. "Actually, sweetheart, your father and I need to talk to you about that," my mother continued. "We think it might be best if you did not attend the wedding." I stopped walking. A woman pushed past me with a stroller, giving me an irritated glance when I did not move out of her way quickly enough. "What do you mean, not attend?" I asked. "She's my sister." "We know this is difficult to hear," my mother said, her words coming faster now. "But Victoria has worked so hard on this wedding, and she wants everything to be perfect. You know how you can be sometimes, Anna. You have a way of making things about yourself, and we just think it would be better for everyone if you sat this one out." I felt something cold settle in my chest. How I can be. What does that even mean? My father's voice came through the phone now, louder and more direct. "Anna, your mother is trying to be diplomatic, but let me be clear. You have a history of causing drama at family events. Remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago, when you got into that argument with your uncle about his business practices? Or last Christmas when you refused to participate in the family photos because you said you felt excluded?" "I felt excluded because I was excluded," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You all spent the entire evening talking about Victoria's promotion while I sat there trying to join the conversation, and Uncle Harold was using exploitative labor practices. Someone needed to say something. See, this is exactly what we are talking about," my father said. "You always think you are right, and you always need to make your point. Victoria's wedding is not the place for your political statements or your need for attention." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I would never do anything to ruin Victoria's wedding. I just want to be there for my sister. "The decision has been made," my father said with finality. "We will send you photos afterward." The line went dead. I stood there in the parking lot, the invitation still clutched in my hand, and felt the familiar ache of being on the outside of my own family. This was not new. I had spent most of my life watching my parents dote on Victoria while treating me like an afterthought. But this felt different. This felt deliberate and cruel. I got into my car and drove to the small marketing agency where I worked as a senior account manager. The office was in a converted warehouse in the River North Art District, and I had always loved the industrial feel of exposed brick and high ceilings. Today, though, everything felt muted and gray. My colleague Trevor looked up from his desk when I walked in. "You look like someone just canceled your birthday." "Worse," I said, dropping my bag on my desk. "My family just uninvited me from my sister's wedding." Trevor's eyebrows shot up. "They can uninvite you from a wedding?" "Apparently they can," I said, sinking into my chair. "They said I would ruin the atmosphere." "That is brutal," Trevor said, walking over to perch on the edge of my desk. "What are you going to do?" "What can I do?" I asked, pulling up my email. They made their choice. I just have to accept it. But even as I said the words, I knew they were not true. I could not simply accept this. My family had been pushing me to the margins for years, but this felt like the final push over the edge. They had decided I was not worth including in one of the most important events in my sister's life, and they had done it without hesitation or apparent remorse. I spent the rest of the day going through the motions at work, responding to client emails and attending meetings without really being present. My mind kept circling back to that phone call, to the casual way my parents had dismissed me, as though my presence or absence at my own sister's wedding was a minor logistical detail to be managed. When I finally left the office that evening, the sun was setting over the mountains in the distance, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I drove home on autopilot, barely noticing the traffic or the familiar streets. My apartment felt empty and cold when I walked in, and I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, trying to decide what to do with myself. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat, scrolling through months of messages. Most of them were about Victoria, her engagement, her new house, her job promotion, her wedding plans. I appeared occasionally in the thread, usually to confirm attendance at some family obligation or to respond to a direct question. I had become a ghost in my own family, present but invisible. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I had spent the entire night lying awake, replaying every family gathering, every holiday, every moment when I had felt like I did not quite belong. The pattern had always been there, but I had explained it away as my own sensitivity, or my tendency to see slights where none existed. Now I saw it for what it was, a systematic exclusion that had been building for years. I went to work and threw myself into my projects with renewed focus. If my family did not value me, I would find value elsewhere. I stayed late at the office, took on extra clients, and volunteered for projects that other people avoided. Trevor noticed the change but said nothing, just brought me coffee when I looked particularly exhausted and made sure I did not skip lunch. 3 weeks passed. On the day of Victoria's wedding, I woke up early and went for a long run through the city. I pushed myself harder than usual, trying to outrun the knowledge that at that very moment, my family was gathering for photos and pre-wedding celebrations. By noon, when I knew the ceremony would be starting, I was at a coffee shop downtown, working on a presentation for a new client pitch. My phone buzzed with notifications throughout the afternoon. Instagram posts from relatives, Facebook updates from family friends, all showing glimpses of the wedding I was not attending. Victoria looked beautiful in a fitted ivory gown. My parents beamed in the family photos. Everyone looked happy and perfect, and no one seemed to notice or care that I was missing. I turned off my phone and finished my work. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at a small Italian restaurant I had been meaning to try. I sat at the bar, ate excellent pasta, and told myself I was fine. I told myself this was just another disappointment in a long line of disappointments, and I would survive it the way I had survived everything else. But when I got home that night, and finally allowed myself to look at the wedding photos my mother had texted me, something broke inside. They were beautiful photos, professional, perfectly lit, everyone smiling. And in every single group shot, in every family arrangement, there was empty space where I should have been. I spent the next few weeks in a strange fog. I went to work, came home, went to work again. I stopped checking the family group chat. I stopped responding to my mother's occasional text messages asking how I was doing. I was not angry anymore. I was just done. Then, in early September, I received a text from my mother saying they wanted to take me to dinner. The message was brief and formal, and something about the tone made my stomach clench with anxiety. I almost said no, but curiosity won out. I agreed to meet them at a steakhouse in the Highland neighborhood the following Saturday evening. I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early and waited at the bar, nursing a glass of wine and trying to calm my nerves. My parents walked in exactly on time, followed by Victoria and her new husband, James. I had not expected my sister to be there, and the sight of her happy, glowing face made something twist painfully in my chest. "Anna, darling," my mother said, kissing my cheek with the same mechanical affection she had shown me my entire life. "You look well." "Thank you for coming," my father added, shaking my hand as though I were a business associate rather than his daughter. We were seated at a corner table, and I found myself positioned at the end, slightly separated from the rest of the group. the symbolism was not lost on me. The conversation started with pleasantries. How was work? How was my apartment? Had I been traveling? I answered their questions with the bare minimum of detail, waiting for the real reason they had asked me here to reveal itself. It did not take long. We had barely finished ordering when my father cleared his throat and exchanged a glance with my mother. "Anna, we wanted to talk to you about something important," he began, folding his hands on the table in front of him. "Your mother and I have been doing some estate planning, and we thought it was only fair to let you know about the decisions we have made." I set down my water glass carefully. "Estate planning." "Yes," my mother chimed in, her voice taking on that too bright quality she used when delivering bad news. "We have decided to leave the bulk of our assets to Victoria. The house, the investment accounts, the vacation property in Aspen. We feel that she is in a better position to manage these things responsibly." The words hung in the air between us. I looked around the table, seeing the carefully neutral expressions on my parents' faces, the uncomfortable way James was studying his menu, and the slight smile playing at the corners of Victoria's mouth. "I see," I said slowly. "And what exactly am I getting?" "Well, there will be some smaller items," my father said, waving his hand dismissively. "Some jewelry that belonged to your grandmother. Perhaps a small cash sum. But Victoria has always been more financially responsible, and she has given us grandchildren to think about now." "She's pregnant?" I asked, looking at my sister. Victoria placed her hand on her stomach with exaggerated care. 3 months, she said. "We wanted to wait until after the wedding to announce it. But yes, you are going to be an aunt." I looked at the 4 of them, sitting there in their perfect bubble of family unity, and realized with startling clarity that this dinner was not about informing me of anything. It was about showing me exactly where I stood. They had not just excluded me from the wedding or the inheritance. They had excluded me from their lives entirely, and this was their way of making sure I understood that. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. My parents talked about their plans for the inheritance, how Victoria and James would use the house, how they would invest the money wisely for their future children. I sat there nodding at appropriate moments, making non-committal sounds, and feeling increasingly detached from the entire scene. Victoria dominated the conversation, as she always did, talking about nursery themes and baby names, and how grateful she was to have such supportive parents. She kept touching her stomach, drawing attention to her pregnancy, and my mother kept reaching over to squeeze her hand with tears in her eyes. "We are just so blessed," my mother said at one point, "to have such a wonderful daughter who has built such a beautiful life." The implicit comparison was not subtle. I had not built a beautiful life, at least not by their standards. I was not married, did not own property, and had not produced grandchildren. I was a disappointment wrapped in a 30-year-old body, and this dinner was their way of making sure I knew it. When the check came, my father made a show of paying for everyone, including me. "Our treat," he said magnanimously, as though he were doing me some great favor. We stood to leave, and Victoria pulled me aside in the parking lot. For a moment, I thought she might say something kind, might acknowledge the cruelty of what our parents had just done. Instead, she smiled that same small smile I had seen at the dinner table. "I know this is hard for you to hear," she said, her voice low enough that our parents could not overhear. "But honestly, Anna, you have to understand. They are giving everything to me because I earned it. I made the choices that built a stable life. I got married. I bought a house. I am starting a family. What have you done? You work at some little marketing agency. You live in a rental apartment, and you are alone. Why would they leave their legacy to someone who has nothing to show for 30 years of life?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The girl I had grown up with, who had shared my room and my secrets, was gone. In her place was someone who measured worth in property and marriages and pregnancies. Someone who thought love was something you earned through achievements, rather than something you received simply by existing. "You are right," I said quietly. "I have nothing to show for my life. Nothing that matters to you, anyway." I walked to my car without saying goodbye to my parents and drove home through the dark streets of Denver. When I got to my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my small balcony, looking out at the city lights. Something had shifted inside me during that dinner. The hurt was still there, sharp and insistent, but it was joined now by something else. Determination, maybe. Or anger. Or just a fundamental refusal to accept the story my family had written about my life. I pulled out my phone and opened a dating app I had downloaded months ago but never used. I had told myself I was too busy for dating, too focused on work, too tired to put in the effort. But sitting there on my balcony, I realized that part of me had accepted my family's narrative. I had started to believe I was unlovable, unworthy, destined to be alone. I spent the next hour updating my profile, choosing photos, writing a bio that actually reflected who I was, rather than who I thought I should be. I was honest about my work, my interests, my life. I did not try to make myself sound more impressive or more accomplished than I was. I just told the truth. The responses started coming in almost immediately. I scrolled through them, deleting the obvious non-starters, responding to a few that seemed genuine. One message caught my attention. It was from someone named Gabriel, and unlike most of the messages that started with comments about my appearance or generic pickup lines, his was thoughtful. "Your profile says you work in marketing, but your real passion is writing," he had written. "What kind of writing? I run a publishing company and I am always interested in meeting people who have something to say." I clicked on his profile. The photos showed a man in his early 30s with dark hair and an easy smile. His bio was minimal but intriguing. Entrepreneur, traveler, reader, terrible cook. There was something unpretentious about it that appealed to me. I wrote back, and we fell into an easy conversation that lasted well past midnight. He asked questions that showed he was actually reading my responses, and he shared details about his own life that felt genuine rather than curated for maximum impression. When we finally said goodnight, I realized I was smiling for the first time in weeks. We messaged back and forth for the next few days, then moved to phone calls. Gabriel's voice was warm and thoughtful, and talking to him felt like talking to someone I had known for years rather than days. He told me about his publishing company, which specialized in debut authors and unconventional voices. He talked about his family in San Diego, his love of hiking, his complete inability to keep houseplants alive. I told him about my work, my friends, my life in Denver. I did not tell him about the wedding or the inheritance or the dinner that had left me feeling so hollow. Those were wounds too fresh to share with someone I barely knew. We met in person on a Tuesday evening at a wine bar downtown. I was nervous, convinced that the easy connection we had built over messages and phone calls would evaporate when confronted with reality. Instead, it deepened. Gabriel was exactly who he had presented himself to be. Intelligent, kind, funny, and genuinely interested in listening as much as talking. We stayed at the wine bar until they closed, then walked through the streets of Denver for another hour, not wanting the evening to end. When he finally kissed me goodnight, standing on the sidewalk outside my apartment building, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. Gabriel and I fell into a relationship with surprising ease. We saw each other 3 or 4 times a week, fitting dates around his business trips and my work schedule. He introduced me to his favorite restaurants, took me hiking in the mountains, and listened with genuine interest when I talked about my marketing campaigns or my ideas for the novel I had been writing in fragments for years. What struck me most about Gabriel was how he saw me, not as a disappointment or a project that needed fixing, but as someone interesting and valuable exactly as I was. He asked about my family only once, early on, and when I gave him a vague answer about being distant from them, he nodded and never pushed for more details. 6 weeks after our first date, Gabriel mentioned casually over breakfast that he needed to go to San Diego for a few days to visit his parents. "Come with me," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I would love for you to meet them." I hesitated. The idea of meeting his parents felt significant, serious, and I was not sure I was ready for that level of commitment. But Gabriel looked at me with such genuine enthusiasm that I found myself agreeing. The trip to San Diego was revelatory. Gabriel's parents lived in a comfortable house in La Jolla, and from the moment we arrived, they treated me with warmth and curiosity. His mother asked about my work and actually listened to my answers. His father wanted to know about my writing and offered to read anything I wanted to share. They were kind to each other and to me, and watching them interact with Gabriel showed me what a healthy family dynamic actually looked like. On our last evening there, we sat on the patio watching the sunset, and Gabriel's mother turned to me with a gentle smile. "I can see why Gabriel is so taken with you," she said. "You have such a lovely energy." I felt tears prick at my eyes. Such a simple compliment, but it meant everything to me in that moment. These people barely knew me, and yet they were treating me with more kindness than my own family had shown me in years. On the flight back to Denver, Gabriel turned to me and said, "I love you, you know." I looked at him, this man who had appeared in my life at exactly the moment I needed him most, and realized I loved him too. "I love you too," I said, and meant it completely. We landed in Denver late on a Sunday night, and I did not check my phone until I was back in my apartment. There were 7 missed calls from my mother and a string of increasingly urgent text messages. I felt a familiar dread settle in my stomach as I read through them. "Anna, call me as soon as you get this. We need to talk about something important. Why are you not answering your phone? This is urgent. Call me immediately." I called her back, even though it was past 11. She answered on the first ring. "Finally," she said, her voice sharp with irritation. "Where have you been?" "I was traveling," I said, not offering any additional details. "What is so urgent?" "Your grandmother is ill," my mother said. "She had a stroke 3 days ago, and she's been asking for you." I felt my heart drop. My grandmother was the one person in my family who had always treated me with unconditional love. She had defended me when my parents criticized me, had sent me care packages when I moved to Denver, had called me every week just to talk. "Why did no one tell me sooner?" I asked, already reaching for my laptop to search for flights. "We tried to call you," my mother said defensively. "You were not answering. And honestly, Anna, we were not sure you would even care enough to come." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. "Of course I care. She is my grandmother." "Which hospital is she in?" My mother gave me the information, and I booked a flight to Chicago for first thing the next morning. Gabriel offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. I arrived at the hospital by noon the following day, and went straight to my grandmother's room. She was tiny in the hospital bed, hooked up to various machines, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Anna," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "I knew you would come." I sat beside her and took her hand, feeling how fragile she had become. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She told me stories from her own youth, asked about my life in Denver, and at one point she gripped my hand tightly. "Anna, I need you to know something," she said. "I changed my will 6 months ago. I left everything to you." I started to protest, but she shook her head. "Listen to me. I have watched your parents treat you like you are invisible for 30 years. I have watched Victoria get everything while you get nothing. That ends now. My estate is not enormous, but it is enough to give you options. Use it wisely." "Grandmother, I do not need your money," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I know you do not need it," she said, smiling softly. That is exactly why I am giving it to you. You will use it for something good, something meaningful. Victoria would just add it to her pile of things she already has. My parents arrived at the hospital that evening. They seemed surprised and vaguely annoyed to find me there, as though I were intruding on their private family moment. We maintained a tense civility for my grandmother's sake, but the atmosphere in the room was thick with unspoken resentment. I stayed in Chicago for 4 days, spending as much time with my grandmother as the hospital would allow. My parents and Victoria visited in shifts, but they never stayed long. I noticed how uncomfortable they seemed around her, how they talked at her rather than with her, how they kept checking their phones and finding excuses to leave. On the 4th day, my grandmother took a turn for the worse. I was holding her hand when she slipped away, peacefully and quietly, with me beside her. My mother arrived 20 minutes later, and immediately began crying dramatic tears. But I noticed how quickly she stopped, once she realized no one was watching. The funeral was scheduled for a week later. I flew back to Denver to prepare, and Gabriel met me at the airport with flowers and an offer to attend the funeral with me. I almost said no, wanting to shield him from my toxic family dynamic, but something made me reconsider. Actually, I said, an idea forming in my mind. I would love for you to come. There is something I need you to know first, though. I told him everything over dinner that night. The wedding exclusion, the inheritance announcement, the years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. Gabriel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as I spoke. When I finished talking, Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took both of my hands in his. I am so sorry you have been dealing with this alone, he said, and I am grateful you trusted me enough to tell me. I want to support you through this however I can. There is something else you should probably know, I said, taking a deep breath. My grandmother left me her entire estate. I found out yesterday when her lawyer contacted me. It is about $3 million. Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression did not change otherwise. That is wonderful, Anna. She clearly loved you very much and wanted to make sure you were taken care of. My parents do not know yet, I continued. They assume the estate will go to Victoria, or at least be split between us. They are going to lose their minds when they find out. Good, Gabriel said simply. They should lose their minds. They have treated you terribly, and they deserve to see that their behavior has consequences. We flew to Chicago together the following week for the funeral. It was held at a small church in the suburb where my grandmother had lived for 40 years. The service was beautiful and sad, filled with people who had loved her genuinely, rather than for what she could give them. My parents barely acknowledged Gabriel when I introduced him before the service. My father gave him a perfunctory handshake, and my mother smiled that thin smile she reserved for people she considered beneath her notice. Victoria looked him up and down with barely concealed assessment, then turned away without speaking. The funeral proceeded without incident, but I could feel the tension building toward the inevitable moment when my grandmother's will would be read. The lawyer had scheduled a meeting at his office for the following afternoon, right after the burial. That evening, I had dinner with Gabriel at our hotel. He had been quiet all day, observing my family interactions with a thoughtful expression. Your family is even worse than you described, he said finally. The way they talk to you, or rather the way they do not talk to you. It is like you are a ghost they occasionally acknowledge out of obligation. That is exactly what it feels like, I said, grateful to have someone who understood. I have felt that way my entire life. Gabriel was quiet for another moment, then smiled. I have an idea. It might be a little crazy, but I think you will like it. He outlined his plan, and with each word, my own smile grew wider. It was audacious and dramatic, and probably a little petty. It was also perfect. Are you sure? I asked. This is a big step. I have never been more sure of anything, Gabriel said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. I was going to wait for a more romantic moment, but timing is everything, and this feels exactly right. Anna, will you marry me? I looked at the ring, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by diamonds, and felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked me over. This man, who had known me for less than 3 months, was offering me everything my family never had: unconditional acceptance, genuine love, and a partnership based on mutual respect. Yes, I said, and then laughed at the absurdity and perfection of the moment. Yes, absolutely yes. We spent the rest of the evening making plans. Gabriel made phone calls to people he knew, pulling strings I did not even know existed. By the time we went to bed, everything was arranged. The next morning, we went to the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. My parents and Victoria were already there, sitting in expensive-looking leather chairs and making small talk about property values. They barely glanced up when Gabriel and I entered. The lawyer, a distinguished older man named Robert, greeted us formally and asked everyone to take a seat. He opened the folder containing my grandmother's will and began to read in a measured, professional tone. The first section detailed some small bequests to various charities and friends. My parents listened with patient expressions, clearly waiting for the important part. Victoria checked her phone twice. Then Robert reached the section about the primary estate. To my granddaughter Anna, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including all financial assets, property, and personal possessions. She is to have complete control over these assets with no restrictions or conditions. The room went silent. My mother's face went white, then red. My father's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Victoria stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "That cannot be right," my father said, finding his voice first. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," Robert said calmly. "Your mother was very clear about her wishes. She updated her will 6 months ago specifically to ensure that her estate would go to Anna." "But why?" my mother demanded, turning to look at me as though I had personally stolen something from her. "What did you do to manipulate her?" "I did not do anything," I said quietly. "I just spent time with her. I called her every week. I visited her when I was in town. I loved her." "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, her voice shaking with rage. "You do not deserve that money. You have done nothing with your life. We should contest the will." "You can certainly try," Robert said, still calm. "But I can assure you that your grandmother was of completely sound mind when she made these changes. She anticipated that there might be objections, and she left detailed documentation explaining her reasoning. Would you like me to read that portion as well?" My father waved his hand in angry dismissal. "That will not be necessary. This is clearly a betrayal of our entire family. Anna, I hope you are proud of yourself." "Actually, I am," I said, standing up. Gabriel stood with me and I felt his hand on my back, solid and supportive. "And I have an announcement that seems appropriate to share right now. Gabriel and I are engaged." I held up my hand, letting the sapphire catch the light. My mother made a small gasping sound. Victoria's face twisted into something ugly. "Engaged?" my mother said faintly. "Since when?" "Since last night," I said. "And we are getting married in 4 weeks? It will be a small ceremony, very intimate. Unfortunately, we have limited space, so we can only invite our closest friends and family. You understand?" The implication was clear. They were not invited. They would be excluded the way they had excluded me. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "You cannot be serious." "Completely serious," Gabriel said, speaking for the first time. His voice was pleasant but firm. "We are very much in love, and we want to celebrate with people who actually care about Anna and support her happiness. That does not seem to include any of you." We left the lawyer's office with my family still sputtering in outrage behind us. In the elevator, Gabriel pulled me close and kissed the top of my head. "That went well," he said, and I burst out laughing, giddy with adrenaline and vindication. Over the next 4 weeks, Gabriel and I threw ourselves into wedding planning with the same energy and efficiency he brought to his business ventures. He insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests about the inheritance money. "Save that for something meaningful," he said. "Besides, I want to do this. Let me give you the wedding you deserve." What he gave me was something beyond my wildest imagination. Gabriel's publishing company was more successful than he had let on. He was not just comfortable, he was genuinely wealthy. His connections ran deep, and his reputation in business and social circles was impeccable. He hired a wedding planner who specialized in high-profile events, someone who had coordinated weddings for celebrities and business magnates. Together, they created something magical. An intimate ceremony at a historic mansion in the mountains outside Denver, with only 40 guests, each one someone who genuinely loved and supported us. But Gabriel had one more surprise for me. "I have a friend who runs a media company," he said one evening about 2 weeks before the wedding. "She would love to cover our wedding. Not in a tacky way, but as a feature on modern love stories. She thinks our story is compelling, two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and built something real in a world that often feels superficial." I was hesitant at first, but Gabriel explained his vision. This was not about showing off or seeking attention. This was about telling our story on our terms, about creating something beautiful and making sure it reached beyond our small circle. "Your family tried to make you invisible," he said. "Let us make you impossible to ignore." I agreed, and Gabriel's friend Diane came to interview us. She was warm and professional, and her questions dug beneath the surface to the real heart of our relationship. We told her about meeting through a dating app, about falling in love quickly but genuinely, about building a partnership based on mutual respect and support. We did not talk about my family specifically, but we talked around them. We discussed the importance of choosing your people rather than being stuck with the ones assigned to you by biology. We talked about how love should be unconditional and support should be unwavering. Diane loved it. She promised us the feature would be beautiful and would run on her platform's social media channels as well as their website. Given their massive following, she expected it would reach millions of people. The week before the wedding, my mother called. I almost did not answer, but curiosity won out. "Anna, we need to talk about this wedding," she said, her voice strained. "You cannot seriously be excluding your own family from your wedding." "I can, and I am," I said calmly. "You excluded me from Victoria's wedding because you said I would ruin the atmosphere. I am extending you the same courtesy." "That was different," my mother protested. "We were trying to protect Victoria's special day." "And I am protecting mine," I said. "The difference is that my concerns are based on your actual behavior, not on imaginary problems I made up. You have spent years making me feel unwelcome in my own family. Now you get to feel what that is like." "You are being vindictive and petty," my mother said, her voice rising. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes us question your judgment." "Then I guess it is good you will not have to witness it in person," I said. "I have to go. I have final dress fittings and tastings and all those wedding things you did not think I was capable of having." I hung up before she could respond. Gabriel, who had been listening from the other room, came in and wrapped me in a hug. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "Are you okay?" "I am more than okay," I said, surprised to realize it was true. For the first time in my life, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. Crisp autumn air, brilliant sunshine, mountains in the distance painted with gold and red leaves. The mansion where we held the ceremony was stunning. All stone walls and arched windows and grounds that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. Diane and her team were there with cameras, but they were so discreet I barely noticed them. They captured everything. Me getting ready with my friends, Gabriel waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes, the ceremony itself which was personal and meaningful, the reception where we danced until midnight under string lights and stars. Our vows were simple, but profound. Gabriel promised to always see me, to always value me, to build a life with me based on partnership and equality. I promised to trust him, to open myself to the love he offered, to be brave enough to accept that I deserved good things. When we kissed as husband and wife, our guests erupted in applause and cheers. I looked out at the crowd of people who had come to celebrate with us and felt overwhelming gratitude. These were people who had chosen to be in my life, who supported me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The reception was perfect. The food was incredible, the music was exactly what we wanted, and every detail reflected our personalities and our relationship. Gabriel gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about how I had changed his life and made him believe in destiny. My best friend from college also gave a toast, talking about how she had watched me struggle with my family for years, and how happy she was to see me finally choosing myself and building a life filled with real love and genuine support. We stayed until the last guest left, not wanting the day to end. When we finally said goodbye to Diane and her team, she promised us the feature would go live on Monday morning. "This is going to be huge," she said, hugging us both. "Your story is exactly what people need to see right now. Real love, real connection, real people choosing happiness over obligation." Gabriel and I spent our wedding night at the mansion, and the next day we flew to Italy for a 2-week honeymoon. We turned off our phones and disconnected from the world, spending our days exploring ancient cities and our nights talking about our future. It was not until we were sitting at a cafe in Rome, exactly 1 week after our wedding, that Gabriel suggested we check our phones. "Diane's feature should be up by now," he said. "Might be fun to see how it turned out." I turned on my phone and watched as notifications began flooding in. Hundreds of them, then thousands. My social media had exploded. The wedding feature had not just gone live, it had gone viral. I sat in that Roman cafe, staring at my phone screen as the numbers continued to climb. The wedding feature Diane had created was not just popular, it had become a phenomenon. Her media platform had over 10 million followers, and the post showcasing our wedding had already been viewed over 5 million times in less than a week. The comments were overwhelming. Thousands of people sharing their own stories of family rejection, of choosing themselves, of finding love after loss. People tagged their friends, shared the post to their own pages, and dissected every detail of the wedding with enthusiasm and genuine joy. But it was not just the numbers that stunned me. Major news outlets had picked up the story. Entertainment websites were running features about the wedding that defined modern romance. Lifestyle magazines were requesting interviews. Fashion bloggers were analyzing my dress and the aesthetic of the wedding. The headline that kept appearing was some variation of "Publishing magnate Gabriel Thompson marries marketing executive in stunning mountain wedding." That was when I learned exactly how successful Gabriel's business actually was. The articles detailed his company's revenue, his real estate holdings, his reputation as one of the most eligible bachelors in the country before he met me. "Why did you not tell me how wealthy you actually are?" I asked, looking up from my phone to meet his amused gaze. Gabriel shrugged, sipping his espresso. "Would it have mattered?" "No," I admitted. "But I feel like that is something you generally mention to the person you are marrying." "I wanted you to fall in love with me, not my bank account," he said simply. "And I wanted to make sure you knew I loved you for exactly who you are, not for any potential connection to your family or your own money." By the time it would have been natural to discuss finances in detail, we were already planning a wedding, and it seemed less important than everything else we were building together. I reached across the table to take his hand. "You are right. It does not matter. But it is a little surreal watching the internet discover my husband is basically a millionaire mogul." "Multi-millionaire," Gabriel corrected with a grin. "Let us be accurate. And you are now my wife, which makes you fairly wealthy yourself, even without your grandmother's inheritance." My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see a text from Trevor at work. Anna, I do not know if you have seen the internet lately, but you are kind of famous. My girlfriend showed me this wedding feature and I was like, that is my colleague. Call me when you get back. Everyone here is losing their minds. More messages followed. Friends from college, former coworkers, people I had not spoken to in years, all reaching out to congratulate me or express their amazement at the wedding coverage. The attention was flattering, but also slightly overwhelming. Then I saw the messages from my family. My mother had sent a long text that began with, "I cannot believe you would humiliate us this way," and devolved into accusations of attention-seeking and manipulation. My father's message was shorter, but angrier, demanding I call him immediately to discuss this spectacle. Victoria had sent a series of increasingly hostile messages, each one more bitter than the last. But it was the final message from Victoria that made me set my phone down and take a deep breath. "Everyone I know has been sending me your wedding pictures, asking why I was not there. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me? You have made our entire family look bad just to make yourself feel important. I always knew you were selfish, but this is a new low." Gabriel had been watching me read the messages, and he could clearly see my expression changing. "Your family?" he asked. I nodded and handed him the phone. He read through the messages, his expression darkening with each one. "They have learned nothing," he said finally. "Even now, when confronted with the consequences of their own behavior, they are making themselves the victims." "What did you expect?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "They have spent my entire life rewriting reality to suit their narrative. Of course they see this as me attacking them, rather than me just living my life." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? Let them be upset. Let them be embarrassed. Let them explain to everyone they know why they were not invited to your wedding. The truth is already out there in the comments. People are not stupid. They can read between the lines of our story and understand that you have been dealing with a toxic family dynamic." He was right. I scrolled through the comments again and saw dozens of people speculating about family estrangement, sharing their own experiences with relatives who did not value them, expressing admiration for my courage in building a life separate from people who did not appreciate me. "The best part," Gabriel continued, "is that you did not even have to explain or justify yourself. You just lived your life, married someone who loves you, and let the natural contrast speak for itself. Your family excluded you from a wedding and cut you out of an inheritance. You responded by finding real love and building real wealth and real happiness. The optics tell the whole story. We stayed in Italy for another week, and I made a conscious decision to stop checking my phone obsessively. The viral attention would fade eventually, and in the meantime, I was on my honeymoon with my husband. That was where my focus should be. When we finally flew back to Denver, reality was waiting. I returned to work to find my desk covered in flowers and congratulations cards from colleagues and clients. Trevor had apparently appointed himself my unofficial publicist and had been fielding questions from people wanting to know more about me and my work. "You are a legend," he said, grinning widely. "The number of new client inquiries we have received mentioning you by name is insane. Our boss is thrilled. You are probably getting a promotion out of this." He was right. 2 weeks later, I was offered a partnership in the firm, with a significant salary increase and equity stake. The viral wedding had inadvertently raised my professional profile, and clients wanted to work with someone who clearly knew how to create compelling narratives and emotional resonance. Gabriel's business also benefited. His publishing company saw a surge of manuscript submissions from debut authors who had read about his support for unconventional voices and wanted to work with him. Several of the authors we ended up signing specifically mentioned being inspired by our love story. But the real reckoning came 6 weeks after the wedding, when Gabriel and I attended a publishing industry event in Chicago. It was a black tie affair at a downtown hotel, and Gabriel had been invited to speak on a panel about the future of independent publishing. I was standing near the bar, waiting for our drinks, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, if it is not the famous Anna. I turned to see Victoria, dressed in a navy cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. She looked thinner than I remembered, and there was something brittle in her smile. "Victoria," I said evenly, "what are you doing here?" "James's firm handles some legal work for publishers," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the crowd. "We got invited. I did not expect to run into you, though I suppose I should have. You are apparently quite the celebrity now." There was acid in her voice, but underneath it, I heard something else. Envy, maybe, or regret. "I am just here to support Gabriel," I said, taking the drinks from the bartender and preparing to leave. "You really did it, did not you?" Victoria said, and there was a strange quality to her voice now, almost wondering. "You went from being the family disappointment to being married to a millionaire with a viral wedding and a successful career. How does that even happen?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone who had built her entire identity on being the favorite, the successful one, the one who did everything right. And now that foundation was crumbling because the sister she had dismissed as worthless had somehow ended up with a life that looked better than hers. "It happened because I stopped waiting for your approval," I said quietly. "I stopped measuring my worth by your standards. I built a life based on what made me happy rather than what would make you and Mom and Dad proud. And I found someone who loves me for exactly who I am, not for what I can do for him or how I make him look." Victoria flinched as though I had slapped her. "You think you are better than us now?" "No," I said, and meant it. "I just think we want different things. You wanted the big wedding that everyone would talk about, the impressive house, the perfect family image. I wanted genuine connection and real love. We both got what we wanted. The difference is that I am happy with what I got." I walked away before she could respond, carrying the drinks back to where Gabriel was standing with a group of colleagues. He saw my face and immediately excused himself, pulling me aside. "What happened?" he asked. "I ran into Victoria," I said. "She is here with her husband. It was weird and sad, and I actually feel sorry for her, which I did not expect." Gabriel pulled me close. "You are allowed to feel complicated things about your family. They are still your family, even if they are not good for you." The panel discussion started a few minutes later, and I found a seat near the front to watch Gabriel speak. He was articulate and passionate, discussing the importance of diverse voices in publishing and the responsibility of those with platforms to amplify stories that might otherwise go unheard. During the question and answer session, someone asked him about the viral wedding and whether he worried about mixing his personal life with his professional reputation. Gabriel smiled and found me in the audience. "My wife and I did not set out to create a viral moment," he said. "We just wanted to celebrate our love with people who supported us. The fact that our story resonated with so many people tells me that there is a real hunger for authentic narratives about love and family and choosing yourself. That is exactly the kind of thing my company wants to publish and promote. So no, I do not worry about the mixing of personal and professional. I think authenticity in all areas of life is something worth striving for." The audience applauded, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. This man understood me completely and was not afraid to defend our choices publicly. After the panel ended, Gabriel and I mingled with the other attendees. Several people approached to congratulate us on the wedding and to discuss potential business collaborations. I was talking to a literary agent about marketing strategies when I saw my parents across the room. They had not seen me yet. They were standing with a group of well-dressed professionals, and my father was holding court the way he always did, expansive gestures and loud laughter. My mother stood beside him with that practiced smile she wore to social events. Then my mother glanced across the room and our eyes met. I watched her expression shift from pleasant neutrality to shock to something that looked almost like fear. She said something to my father, who turned to look at me. His face went red. They started walking toward me, and I felt Gabriel materialize at my side, his hand on my back. "Anna, we need to talk," my father said without preamble when they reached us. "Privately. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of my husband," I replied calmly. My mother looked around nervously, clearly aware that people were watching. "This is not the place for a family discussion." "You are right," I agreed. "This is not the place. Neither was the restaurant where you told me I was cut out of the inheritance, but that did not stop you. What do you want?" My father's jaw clenched. "We want you to stop embarrassing this family. That wedding spectacle, the media coverage, making us look like villains in your little fairy tale. It needs to stop." "I did not make you look like anything," I said. "I got married. I did not mention you in any interview or post. I simply lived my life, and people drew their own conclusions based on the information available to them. If they think you are villains, maybe you should examine your own behavior. You deliberately excluded us from your wedding after we supported you your entire life," my mother hissed, her voice low but intense. "You turned our family into a joke." "You excluded me first," I said simply. "From Victoria's wedding, from the inheritance, from the basic respect and love that parents should show their children. I just decided I did not need people in my life who treated me like I was worthless." "You were never worthless," my father said, but it sounded hollow even to him. "You were difficult. You always made everything about yourself." Gabriel spoke for the first time, his voice cold and controlled. "With respect, you do not know your daughter at all. Anna is the least self-centered person I have ever met. She spent 30 years trying to earn your approval by making herself smaller and quieter and less demanding. You interpreted her pain as selfishness because it was easier than acknowledging your own failures as parents." My father's face turned a deeper shade of red. "Who do you think you are, speaking to us like that?" "I am the man who loves your daughter enough to see her clearly," Gabriel said. "I am the man who gets to build a life with her, support her dreams, and give her the family she deserves. And I am the man who is going to make sure she never has to beg for scraps of affection from people who should have given it freely." The small crowd that had gathered around us was silent. My mother looked like she might cry, but I suspected it was more from embarrassment than genuine emotion. My father looked like he wanted to hit someone but knew he could not. Not here. Not in front of witnesses. "You are going to regret this," my father said finally. "Both of you." "The only thing I regret," I said quietly, "is the 30 years I spent thinking there was something wrong with me instead of recognizing that you were the ones who were broken. But I do not regret it anymore. Every painful moment led me here, to this life, with this man, and I would not change it even if I could." I took Gabriel's hand and walked away from my parents for what I knew would be the last time. Behind us, I heard my mother say something to my father, her voice shaking, but I did not turn around. I was done looking back. Gabriel and I left the event shortly after and walked along the Chicago Riverwalk, not talking, just being together. The city lights reflected on the water, and the night was cool and clear. "Are you okay?" Gabriel asked finally. "I am more than okay," I said, surprised to find it was completely true. That should have been devastating, seeing them again, hearing them still refuse to take responsibility. But it was not. It was just sad. They are going to spend the rest of their lives being exactly who they are, and I get to spend the rest of mine being free of them. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of my family's behavior became increasingly apparent. Victoria's pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, and instead of coming together to support her, my parents focused on their own social embarrassment from the viral wedding situation. The stress fractured their relationship with Victoria and James, who began to see patterns they had previously ignored. Victoria's perfect life started to show its cracks, and within 6 months, she and James separated. My parents, desperate to maintain appearances, threw money at Victoria's problems instead of offering genuine emotional support, and the distance between them grew. They became known in their social circles as the family from that viral wedding story, the parents who lost their daughter through their own cruelty, and no amount of charitable donations or society appearances could rehabilitate their reputation. Looking back on everything now, I realize revenge was never about hurting them the way they hurt me. It was about building something so beautiful and so real that their rejection could not touch it. Gabriel and I built our life on foundations of mutual respect and genuine love, and that was the greatest revenge of all, proving that I did not need them, that I could thrive without their approval, and that happiness was not something they could give or take away. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and loving wholly, and letting the truth speak for itself.